Bitcoin being rooted directly into energy, I think, is the best choice, because if you try to root it into or peg it to a precious metal, you end up with an oracle problem. It's what they call us in computer science. Like, who do you trust to maintain the peg? We just tried that with central banking, right?
Right.
It was the dollar was
Right.
pegged to gold. Yeah, we'll trust you guys to maintain the peg, and then what happens? The peg is never maintained.
Yeah.
Human nature and human corruption ruins the whole thing. Um, but Bitcoin's just this invention that sort of circumvents that to some extent. And look, I mean, admittedly, you're talking to a guy that holds only Bitcoin. I've studied this whole space for years and years. I used to run a fund on the other stuff. Crypto can be very bright and shiny and exciting, but my current views on it are that it's mostly scams at worst, or innovation theater at best. I don't think there's a lot of real utility that's come out of that sector yet. I'll reserve the humility to say that I don't know everything, and maybe something does work out. But it does seem like Bitcoin is the success story in the sector to date. So
I'm with you that as we try to imagine, getting back on topic, um, if if uh, if the theorem here that this is a really amazingly coordinated global gamble by people that have had a multi-generational lock on power and wealth. If we
yeah,
accept that hypothesis for the sake of argument,
yeah,
um, and they may or may not succeed in their gambit to maintain that dominance through a boundary event that I think probably you and most of your listeners would concur is on the horizon.
mm-hmm.
Uh, and there's all the nuance of the interaction of labor and mechanization and everything else
Mm-hmm.
as we move through that boundary event. If they maintain their power or consolidate it as they appear to be seeking to do, then for those of us who don't want to live under an authoritarian, highly controlled structure, as opposed to those that we could refer to them as sheep, as a pejorative, people who just want to be told what to do,
Mm-hmm.
and they're perfectly content to live in that world. But for you and I, we're not. We're never going to be happy. We would consider that the equivalent of being chained to the tree in the yard, barking at the mailman. Then what are our options? And I do think that we fall back to a world almost no matter what. I think of the metaphor of the monasteries during the Dark Ages, which are kind of the ultimate intentional community. If you think back, I'm trying to look back in history and say, well, what's a metaphor that we could use and build on that actually worked at some period in human history? Monasteries kind of are that thing in a lot of ways. So if that's a metaphor, what does a monastery need? Well, a monastery is actually a small community, much like an Amish community, and it can get by with barter and exchange, and it basically runs as a commune with a central authority figure and a power structure. That was the abbot, and then they interacted and traded with each other over long distances, and were subject to predation, thievery, etc. during those transactions. But that was the world. So if that is kind of the starting point for imagining what a intentional community looks like, and I can see in my own world the gradual assembly of a community starting to happen of largely libertarian people that happen to be in this little part of Virginia. I don't know why. The people that run CPAC live about 5 miles north of me. mean, there's just, for some reason in this part of the world, we seem to have a cluster of libertarian leaning folks. And maybe it's the influence of Thomas Jefferson and Madison, et cetera. Maybe their ghosts are still around us.
Yeah.
You know, they all lived with their farms are still there, not very far from mine. So who knows what it is? Maybe it's something in the water, but I feel this coalescing, and sense it. And then, so I try to say, well, how could that be enhanced? How could we enable that? What would be the prerequisites? And I think there has to be these basic services. There has to be the ability to produce grain and food. There has to be some solutions for energy. Well, in this area, we have a lot of water power. And there has to be some medium of exchange, and probably something akin to a bank that can recycle a deposit in a way that enables loans, basically enables venture capital. That's really what a loan is. Within that community, and is able to become self-sustaining and autonomous. Brock, when I was with him 2 Wednesdays ago, he spoke about this new momentum that had started with the effort to build this floating city. I'm sure you've heard about it, that apparently failed. It's not economically viable. And now apparently the same people are interacting with heads of state in emerging economies or depressed economies throughout the world, and creating what are essentially economic autonomous zones that are empowered to create their own legal structure, which is really kind of the same idea.
Yeah.
So I don't know where all this goes, but getting back on topic, I do feel like the only way that I can, there must be other hypotheses than it's a small number of families wickedly trying to grasp power and maintain their economic dominance over the rest of the world. I just haven't run into any other hypotheses that fit the data as well. And run into something else. And if that's what's really going on, I think it behooves us, and is, you know, consistent with the topic of your podcast. How do those of us who value freedom, who live based on a commitment to fundamentally libertarian, which is really historically old school liberalism.
Yeah, right.
Principles.
Yeah. Yeah, low to no government, right? That's the language has been attacked and distorted, but I think that's what we mean here. Look, Robert, I've kept you way over time. Sorry.
I've been having too much fun, so I didn't notice the camera.
Same here. The book, again, Lies My Government Told Me. I think you said publication date is September 2022.
That's the projection. Yep.
Well,
hopefully
really
beat that timeline.
Really looking forward to it. I was fortunate to read some of it in preparation for this interview, but I look forward to getting through the rest. Thank you again. I really appreciate you coming on, and thanks for all the work you're doing for the world.